Hello and what's up YouTube? Today I will show you some work I recently did with my CRF250L motorcycle. Look at the neck and you may notice something unusual. Yes, there is no VIN or vehicle identification number on the neck. Some years ago, I had a collision accident and the original frame of the bike got deformed beyond repair. I bought a new frame from Honda as a replacement. And as you would expect with a new frame, it has no VIN. Without the VIN, the bike will not pass the MOT annual inspection. Now, due to some unfortunate turn-up events, I cannot resolve the lack of vehicle identification number issue just by navigating through the usual red tape. So I did what every DIY guy will do and took the matter into my own hands. I transplanted the original neck with the VIN to the new frame. And that is what this video is all about. The task at hand is to cut out a portion of the new head tube and fit this in place. That has the original vehicle identification number. Then weld it such that it will be very convincing that there was no modification or tampering done to the frame. I roughly mark the part that I want to cut. The first cutout will be this rectangle. Since I am using cut-off wheel on an angle grinder, and this setup can only cut off straight lines. Using an angle grinder is inherently dangerous, and using a very thin cut-off wheel in a very awkward position is almost like a disaster waiting to happen. On my very first cuts, I somehow tilt the grinder while cutting, and the cut-off wheel shattered. It happened so fast and I did feel something hitting my face shield. Fortunately, I did not sustain any injury. It helps that the grinder has a safety mechanism that automatically shuts down when it got out of my grip. Now that clip is something to share at our next OSHA safety meeting. After I cut out a rectangle, it is then time to carefully cut out smaller pieces little by little. I'm still using this very thin cut-off wheel but have been very careful this time. The cuts I'm making follow the curvature of the weld bead, and it will become apparent later why I must do that. After cutting as many pieces as possible using this thin cut-off wheel, I then switch to the grinding wheel to continue removing materials. By now you might have already noticed that I aim to grind away half of the width of the existing weld beads. And I also did the same to the original neck piece that will go to the new frame. It is worth mentioning that the bike stand I'm using for the CRF250L is the best for this kind of work because it is very stable and had wheels, so I can move the bike around even with the front wheel removed. Please take a look at my other videos on how I built that simple but very useful stand. So after about 4 hours I spent cutting and grinding, this is how it turned out. The neck piece fits the frame to its original location and is almost ready for welding. Fitting the donor piece is the single most important step to this next surgery transplant operation. In preparation for welding, I used a paint stripper to remove the paint near the surfaces I will weld. What I do not want to do is to grind or sand the surfaces that will be visible later, and a telltale sign that the frame was modified. The MOT inspector will not be happy about that and may scrutinize further. I will now explain the medical science that goes with the neck surgery that I'm doing. You will see that I cut out a part of the original neck following the contour of the weld bead. I cut out about half of the weld bead from the frame and the donor piece. This is the part of the frame that takes a lot of stress, but I did not do anything at that part. I intentionally left out the top and bottom of the head tube that holds the steering bearing raceway, so I can be sure that the original alignment of the front suspension is not changed. The strength of the head tube is not much affected either because the lower part still has a lot of the original material on it, which I did not touch. I'm confident that this modification will not adversely affect the safety and reliability of the bike. Having said that, this bike will not by any stretch of imagination ever do a triple jump or double back flips. Now my favorite part of this neck transplant surgery is stitching it together. I started by making tack welds on the corners. I think this time you must have figured out that on the welding side of things, I will only weld on the edges with the original factory-made weld beads, mainly for cosmetic reasons. You will notice that I installed the triple three together with the steering bearings before I do any welding. It is important to ensure that the upper and lower bearing raceways do not get misaligned in case the frame tries to warp due to the heat. I did not think that the frame will warp badly, but I did it anyway as an added insurance. I have a very shaky hands and I can only do half decent welds in 1G and 2G positions. So, I laid the bike down on the side, got down to the floor, and made myself comfortable. Because it is now or never and I only have one chance to do this right. I'm using TIG as it gives me a lot of control over how the final welds will look like. This is cosmetic surgery after all, and the outcome must be very convincing that the welds are made by robots and not by a random DIY guy. The MOT inspector must not have any doubts. The cuts I made left some relatively wide gaps between the edges I need to butt weld. That is good so that I can get better penetration and give some room for when things start to shrink. I am using 1.2mm MIG wire as a filler and have been very careful not to deposit too much filler material and make the weld bead higher. Keep in mind that I cannot sand or grind the final weld beads because it must look as if it was made in the factory by CNC welding robots. Remember, in cosmetic surgery, looks is the utmost important goal. I'm using the lay wire technique during TIG welding wherein the filler wire is always on the paddle as opposed to the usual dab technique. The latter will produce the stack of dimes look that, although looks awesome, is not exactly what we want here because in the Honda factory, they used robots and MIG welding. So basically, I'm trying to achieve a TIG welding that looks like MIG. While grinding and fitting took hours, the actual welding only took about 10 minutes, and I'm happy with the results. From the looks of it, I don't think anyone can tell that the head tube is not one piece, and that there was additional welding done aside from that from the factory. After the surgery, I drive the bike about a week, and remarkably, both the bike and I are still in one piece. I did not notice any change to the feel and handling of the bike. To wrap up the cosmetic surgery, some makeup was applied to the neck using some cheapo rattle can paint. To ensure that the new paint blend in, I stripped some paint further down the frame until the areas where it will be covered by the plastics and other parts of the bike. Again, it should not be obvious that modifications were made to the frame, as the MOT inspector will not be pleased about that. And finally, I was able to send the bike for MOT annual vehicle inspection, and it did pass with flying colors. Thank you very much for watching this video and would like to hear some of your comments below. Be sure to press the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Have a nice day.